We're going to be discussing steps to controlling chinch bugs on lawns on this edition of the DIY Pest Control Podcast. Welcome to the DIY Pest Control Podcast, where you get the best info for those who want to perform their own pest control. The DIY Pest Control Podcast is brought to you by Nature Pest. Nature Pest has been providing the finest in commercial and residential integrated pest management for structural, lawns, trees, shrubs, and mosquitoes with better control and less contamination at an affordable price. For more info, visit us at naturepest.com. Hey, welcome back to this edition of the DIY Pest Control Podcast. We're going to be discussing how to control chinch bugs on lawn. I'm Frank Hernandez, Chief Everything Officer here at Nature Pest, and my main position is the Certified Pest Control Operator, and I'm also a horticultural specialist, helping you solve home, lawn, and pest control problems on your trees, shrubs, and palms. And we're going to be discussing the issue of chinch bug. And chinch bug is a huge problem with a lot of lawns, especially St. Augustine lawns here in South Florida. Now, originally, St. Augustine was supposed to be resistant to chinch bug. But, of course, these pests do mutate and evolve, and they change their biology, and they become very adaptive to their environments. And one of the major causes of chinch bug resistance in lawns has been the amount of the overuse and the misuse of products like pyrethroids, where they are resistant to a lot of the pyrethroids that are used for spraying lawns. They do become resistant. And part of the problem is overuse and the wrong amount used. People, especially a lot of lawn care companies, they misuse the product or underapply it or overuse it. I mean, it's just the common. So how do you deal with that? Well, the number one thing that you need to do in order to make your lawn resistant to chinch bug, or more resistant, is have the right cultural practices in place. The second biggest common problem of chinch bug. But the biggest common problem that we have with chinch bug is actually what is known as a cultural practice. And what are cultural practices? Well, it's mowing, trimming, irrigation, the things that you control as either a technician, a landscaper, or the homeowner, that you do to mow the lawn, trim the lawn, whatever it is that you're doing. And those cultural practices, if they're not spot on, will cause a series of headaches with fungal diseases, with insects, and it's just not going to look right. And the most common two practices is either scalping the lawn, which is mowing it too short, and too infrequently, where you wait 2 to 3 weeks to mow your lawn, or the misapplication of water by actually watering the lawn at night, letting it sit all night with that water on it, and then causing fungal diseases. Just applying too much water too often. Some people irrigate every day, some 4 times a week. So it's getting that practice right that's going to help that lawn become resistant to pests and diseases. It's not about chemical, because we got a problem with chemical where we have resistance issues. Most of the products that you're going to buy over the counter at your hardware store or at a home improvement store for your lawn treatment, those are 50-year-old products. Those are not modern products. They've been around forever. They're very cheap to manufacture. There's no patent on them. They're all generic, and you can just, over-apply those products, and the over-application of those products causing resistance. So that's the major challenge, and this is why there's a big difference between a professional doing your lawn, a real lawn care professional, and somebody who just sprays your lawn with any insecticide and hoping it's going to work. And it's about having that knowledge of how that plant is best going to thrive. That's going to determine how much control you get. So with chinch bug, it's a common misdiagnosis. I mean, something happens to a lawn, and I get a call from a customer, who says they're having a problem with chinch bug. And when we look at it, we find, well, it's a disease problem. It's not chinch bug. Sometimes it is chinch bug, and it gets misdiagnosed as a disease because after the fact, the symptoms are similar, what it looks like. So how are you going to determine if you have chinch bug? The number one step is identifying and making sure that you do have chinch bug. Chinch bugs are very, very tiny little insects. When they're fully grown adults, they're probably as big as the date on a dime. And when they're really, really small, they're probably about the size of one of the numbers on the date of a dime. So unless you've actually ever seen one and identified one, you really don't know what it looks like. You gotta go down into the dirt, open up the area. The best way to identify it is to go to where the area at the edge of where it's green and yellow or green and brown, and look a couple of inches to each direction past the thatch, going into the soil. And then you'll see these little tiny whitish, brown, black insects that are crawling. And those are the chinch bugs. But unless you really, somebody has pointed it out to you, can identify it, makes it very difficult to identify whether you have chinch bug. Chinch bug can basically, in the summer months, they can hatch between about 6 to 13 days on average. And the incubation period is about 11 days. So it's a very, very short incubation period for them to start living and causing damage. And, they can move in very, very quickly from a neighboring yard, from a neighboring area into your lawn, especially if your lawn is stressed. And this is where it happens. People allow their lawn to get stressed either by water stress or by mowing it incorrectly or by applying a fertilizer incorrectly. And that just makes it more susceptible. One of the ways that they recommend you look for chinch bug is using a floating device by cutting open a can of like a coffee can, and you cut both sides out, and then you kind of, pound it into the dirt to create a ring, and then you fill that up with water, and then the chinch bugs will float to the top. That is one way to do it. But getting control is another thing. How are you going to get control? If you end up with a resistance problem to pyrethroids, those classes of insecticides that will use the sodium channel of the insect and basically allow it to be flooded with sodium and then causing paralysis and killing the insect. The problem with pyrethroids is that they're available in so many different active ingredient names. And so if you switch from one pyrethroid to another and it's a different active ingredient or a different name, it's still a pyrethroid and you can still have resistance to it. So if you're resistant to one, you could be resistant to a lot of them. So the number one prevention tool that you have really is mowing that lawn every week at least. St. Augustine lawn mowed 3 to 4 inches high. Okay. Use a mulching mower. Do not pick up the leaves. Do not use side discharge. And use a mulching mower that's going to put that back into the lawn and use it as fertilizer. The second thing is fertilizing maybe 3 times a year. Okay, so you can in the middle, spring, summer, and then fall, and then that should keep your lawn nice and healthy. Then you have to deal with the insects and the diseases. You can do it one of 2 ways. If you're going to do it on a preventive basis, you're going to have to apply a pesticide constantly to your lawn, about every 30 days to every 60 days, depending on what you use. If you use a pyrethroid, you have to use it at the label rate. And a lot of problem is that a lot of labels get cut by a lot of people in the industry because they're spraying shrubs and they're spraying the lawn, and you can't use the same dosage. So they use the low dosage, which is for the shrubs on the lawn, and it never ends up controlling the chinch bug. It just creates a resistance to it. And that's a common malpractice of a lot of landscape people. The second thing is you got to know at what rate you're going to apply it. If the product comes pre-mixed in a spray bottle that you attach to your hose and it says for 2,000 square feet and you have 4,000 square feet, then you need to buy 2 bottles because you cannot apply that entire bottle to the entire lawn because you're going to have a low dosage and you're going to get a resistance. So that's the major thing. If you're going to use a granular product, you got to apply the right granular product at the right distribution by either using a push spreader or a hand spreader, but you got to make sure it's calibrated so that you know you're applying the right dosage. You just can't apply it at any dosage. The third thing that you'll have to do is decide whether you're going to use a neonicotinoid. Now, the difference between a pyrethroid and a neonicotinoid is the pyrethroid is going to work basically on contact with the insect. You're going to spray it. It's going to kill it on contact. The residuals are going to be probably very low. 7 days, 14 days, 28 days tops in the soil. Because depending on your soil, whether it's alkaline or acid, if it's alkaline, it's going to be much shorter because it's going to degrade the product much quicker. You have rain, you have sunlight that degrades the product. So it mainly works by killing the insect that's there at that time. If you have an insect where it's breeding, you might have to come back and make a second application of that pyrethroid in order to get that second generation that's growing or the ones that have hatched. On the other hand, if you use a neonicotinoid, neonicotinoids work both ways. They work as a contact, killing that insect on contact, but then it also gets inside the leaf of the lawn. And by getting inside through the roots, it's systemic action. So when the chinch bug, which is a sucking insect, sucks on the crown, they don't suck on the leaf or the roots, but the crown, then that crown is contaminated with the product inside, and then they die. So for lawn care, you can use a combination of both. If you're having a problem and you only want to do it once, solve that problem, deal with it again later, then a pyrethroid is going to work really good. Now, there are natural products that will also kill on contact. Natural products that contain clove oil, geranol, that contain cedar oil. A lot of these oils will kill on contact. And they work also as a repellent. But you got to, again, use it according to label directions, because if you put too little or too much can burn that plant because it's an oil, and too little will not get you control. So it's about finding a good product that's going to give you what you want. We can use naturals, but understand you're going to apply them again and again. The same with pyrethroids. You're going to apply them again and again. It's not because the product is a professional product or a synthetic product that's going to guarantee you long-term use or long-term prevention. It's based on how that chemical active ingredient is. And then lastly, using your neonic. Now, there is a big controversy about neonics, where if you use a neonic, it can affect bees. The good thing about lawns is, in a neonic environment with bees, is that bees don't tend to go on lawns unless you have dandelions and unless you have flowered species. You're not going to find bees on lawns. So it has very little effect in that case on bees. But it's about finding the right combination that's going to solve the problem, and it's going to be the most environmentally responsible for the environment, and meaning where you walk on, what you are on, plus also all the other pollinators and insects and other animals that it can affect if that product, protecting our groundwater, if it leaches into the groundwater. So the way you control pesticides is by first, again, getting the cultural practice right. Then that reduces the amount of pesticide you have to apply on a yearly basis to a lawn. So if you only have to make 2 applications per year, that's a lot better than 12 or 6 applications on a program. And that's kind of how we look at it, is we target only the pest that we're targeting, get rid of it, and then if we have a weed, we deal with that. If we have a disease, we deal with that. But we just don't apply 5 chemical products on a bi-monthly basis in hopes that we're going to get everything that could possibly ever happen to that lawn. Number 1, that's very expensive for the homeowner. Number 2, it's not environmentally responsible. It's not integrated pest management. And so that's how we deal with it. I hope that it helps you deal with it. Just remember to always, always, always follow label directions when applying any pesticide. Keep pesticides out of reach of children, and that means nowhere that a kid can actually get his hands on it. With that, guys, it's been fun. I've had a blast doing this podcast, and I will see you next time. Thank you for listening to the DIY Pest Control Podcast. Please remember that although Franklin Hernandez is a certified and licensed pest control operator in the state of Florida, the content of this podcast is for informational purposes only. You should consult your local and state government or cooperative extension service before performing any pest control service. Remember to always read and follow label directions because the label is the law.